In the 190th Block Talks, we speak with Amanda Wick, founder of the Association for Women in Crypto and author of The Catalysts, who talks about how responsible innovation can drive adoption. I'm your host, Mauricio Magaldi, and this is Block Drops, your weekly digest on blockchain for business. These news are not a form of endorsement, sponsorship, or encouragement for consumption, and are meant for educational purposes only. All right, everybody. I'm here with Amanda Wick, finally, who's going to tell us who she is and what she does with blockchain. I'm so happy we made this. Welcome to Block Talks.
Thank you for having me and for your patience. I feel like between the two of us, the stars have finally aligned schedules. So it was clearly meant to be now.
And it is a very momentous occasion for you because right now we are in the wake of the launch of your book, which we're going to talk about. But before that, let's get the Amanda Wick, the superhero origin story going.
Okay, well, no pressure with that lead up, but I spent about a decade working at the U.S. Department of Justice. I was a federal prosecutor, mostly specializing in money laundering cases and asset recovery. And back in 2012, I think, I caught a crypto case, and one of my agents came in and said, "Do you know what a Bitcoin is?" And I said, "I don't think that's a real thing." He said, "It is." And we got a guy laundering a bunch of it on the dark net. So we're going to need to figure out what it is. And so back then, there wasn't really a training program at DOJ. Nobody really knew what it was. So we just kind of went on Google and YouTube University and learned about it. And years later, I got into the tech and loved that there were positive use cases to it in addition to the criminal use cases. And then I left the government and I went to FinCEN first, but then I left the government and spent a year as the chief of legal affairs at a blockchain analytics company. And then after that, I went back to the government for a year. And then I left and started the Association for Women in Crypto, which is a global association, a professional association for women and allies to make the industry more inclusive to women. And I do consulting advisory work on the side. And just launched this book, The Catalysts, The Accelerating Forces Forging the New World Financial Order. So it has been a crazy busy year, and that's my only excuse for not getting on here sooner when you were sweet enough to ask me.
That is quite a loaded background. Now, I do want to double click on the epiphany moment when you realize that there are cool things to be done with the tech. What made you realize that? What were the things that indicated that after having what I would consider a not so ecstatic experience, first and foremost, with people using crypto to launder money, what was the thing that turned that around and made you fall in love with the possibilities of the technology?
I think it was more just seeing the possible positive use cases. I don't think I kind of fell in love with it or got really passionate about it until I started running a gender advocacy group. And that was frankly long after I got into crypto. But when I started the Association for Women in Crypto and I started talking with women and allies all over the world, but obviously mostly women, I think people don't realize how recently, even in some developed countries like the United States, women have had autonomy over their finances. And it was less than 50 years ago in the United States that women were finally given the ability to own their own bank account without their husband's permission. And so I think there was a part of me that, when Afghanistan fell and the Taliban took over, there were women who had crypto wallets on, paper wallets that were able to leave with their family's income on a crypto wallet, while other people were standing in line for hours futilely trying to get their money out of a bank. And you hear this story with refugees everywhere, with Ukraine and projects that they've done. And I think there's just something that women are especially cognizant of, the importance of having financial autonomy, financial freedom the importance of financial autonomy is freedom. And so I think that probably above all things has been the thing that I'm most passionate about. And we work with companies and projects around the world that are building, basically financial enablement or financial empowerment, most people call it, for women to own their own businesses, make their own income. And they're able to do all of that using crypto, which is a pretty incredible thing. And so I think that's probably the thing that actually finally got me to be passionate about it. Whereas prior to that, I objectively could see the use cases and could see that there was good to it in addition to bad. But I think it was that I was like, this is really worth fighting for and saving.
As you develop your way through the industry, what were the things that confirmed or challenged that vision of the positives? What are the things that um, early on or even currently kind of confirmed that impression, and probably what are the things that have or continue to challenge um, that potential?
I have to say, and maybe it was just because I spent a year at a blockchain analytics company, and I feel like I saw mostly the challenges, right? And this was back, no, let me back up for a second. When I was in the government, it was definitely the challenges, but the challenges were a frustration when we would go to events with industry representatives, where back then the challenge was people who were advocating for the anonymous free flow of money. So blockchain analytics wasn't really invented until I want to say 2014-ish, after the Mt. Gox hack, when folks were trying to trace that money and came up with the ability to basically how to trace Bitcoin, right? But prior to that, it was just the anonymous free flow of money, like Bitcoin peer to peer. That was just nobody knew who anyone was. There was no way to tell who public addresses were. And it was very frustrating because those of us who were in national security, those of us who were looking at the flows of illicit finance, and those of us who were seeing what was happening on darknet markets and what was happening possibly with terrorist financing, were very concerned. You just created a store of value that's transportable and movable peer to peer with no intermediaries, with no AML, or excuse me, anti money laundering, AML, countering the finance of terrorism, CFT. So no AML or CFT controls, no sanctions controls. You're just letting the anonymous free flow of money happen. And there was a head of a major I'll say think tank in the United States, who was on stage one day, and I said, you can't possibly be advocating for that after 9/11. And he said, why not? Like, technologically, we can have that. And that was a real problem, I think, that the industry had for a long time, was that you had a lot of tech bros who came over. Maybe they'd worked at Uber, maybe they'd worked at Airbnb, and they were really used to putting people in houses and moving people in cars. And they thought that the moving of funds was the same thing. And they did not realize they were entering the most highly regulated space, because moving money is different. And I think the industry being really, really slow to acknowledge that, to want to do compliance, to want to have regulation, to want to acknowledge like how the world has to work, really set it back many, many years further than it needed to be. I think things are better now, for sure, but that was really challenging at the beginning.
I want to borrow something that I think you invented, which is the uh, the parallels between crypto Twitter and crypto LinkedIn. It sounds like you're describing a world where crypto Twitter was a thing, but then they need to become crypto LinkedIn to be legitimate. And I think it plays well to that analogy.
There is definitely that. I mean, I think that battle, frankly, is not only still raging today, but is now raging even harder, because for 4 years, we had a very bad crypto policy in the United States under the previous administration. And it's kind of one of those be careful what you wish for things, because a pendulum rarely ever swings to the middle, right? And so one could say that the previous administration was overly crypto linked in, too much regulation, regulation by enforcement, no emerging tech policy whatsoever. And now, unfortunately, the course correction is, whoa, crypto Twitter, the president has a pump and dump rug pull scheme going on with his own meme coin. So that's, it's unfortunate that America hasn't really done nuance or moderation or temperance for a while. But I think watching that has been kind of interesting, because I feel like the battle between crypto Twitter and crypto LinkedIn has been waged for years. I think the previous administration actually hurt us more than helped us. And now crypto Twitter is winning. And the question is what happens if financial services or the future of digital finance, if crypto Twitter wins, does that make the future of digital finance basically Biff World from Back to the Future Part 2 kind of thing?
Oh yeah, yeah. Oh my God, that is apocalyptic. But to that end, I think I wrote as part of the push for point zero, which I unfortunately I couldn't make it in person, but I wrote a piece on. I think you used the word temperance. It was eh, more like, okay, we know what deregulation does. It creates amazing short term wins and then disastrous and unpredictable long term future. We saw this with the mortgage industry and how it culminated in the CDS CDO global financial crisis in '08, and we've seen this with many other industries before and after. And I think crypto, with a load of irony, was born from the wake of the global financial crisis in '08. Cannot afford to do the same. So more regulation or less regulation can't play this game, but proper regulation has to. So that was my kind of 2 second take on that. And you coming from a background in law enforcement and in on chain oversight, um, I think you echoed that in that regard. So it's do you not see a scenario, and we can explore this further, obviously, in which these two things can be true simultaneously?
I do. I will tell you, my fear is that we've, or I have been wrong, and that what we're starting to see is that actually what crypto's really doing is showing the world that we were actually always really okay with money laundering and terrorist financing until there was a terrorist incident. And the reason I say that is because, I look at one of the things about President Trump that I think sometimes he's treated quite unfairly for is that there are very few things that he actually invents or does that are new. What he's actually really good at is looking at something, corruption, hypocrisy, or just illegality that others have done, and saying, if you're willing to do that at 5 miles an hour, why aren't you willing to do it at 50? And so when you look at what he's doing, it's not like he invented the overreach of the executive order. There were plenty of presidents who did that, right? If you look at what he's doing with, selling presidential favors for Trump coin, et cetera, there were presidents that sold access in their own way. So like the system was already broken. It really just wasn't as out in the open. And I was on a panel the other day, and it was interesting because I felt, and this was part of the realization that went into the book, where as a former money laundering prosecutor, like I watched every day the US Department of Justice choose not to enforce the law. There were cases that we had that should have been brought that we couldn't get approvals for. And that was a very frustrating process. And the funny thing about crypto is there was this system that we had in the United States. It's usually referred to as the Bank Secrecy Act, but globally it's generally referred to as AML-CFT, right? But this concept of detecting money laundering and terrorist financing in banks. And this structure that we had for it was very much a box checking exercise, right? You look at HSBC, TD Bank, Deutsche Bank, right? If you look at Western Union, like a lot of the major enforcement actions, like banks generally, they did the best they could, sort of, kind of, and then eventually, usually there was somebody in the bank who said, but we can make a lot of money doing this. And somebody would evaluate the likely cost of an enforcement action. Nobody ever went to prison. Okay, let's take our chances and we'll see what happens. And the fines are generally pretty manageable. So the cost benefit analysis of getting people to do real compliance is actually really hard. So then crypto comes along. And the funny thing is that because crypto, especially on open blockchains, is so visible, you have so much visibility at the transaction level. You don't necessarily at the identity level, but if all I care about is detecting illicit finance, I care less who does it and more about where it's being done and how it's being done and identifying it. So now imagine like you have a block, right? And essentially AML-CFT is a framework for how to keep your house clean. And previously, all we had on that block were brick houses with windows, sometimes with windows with shutters or curtains. And we could see in when we went and we peeked and we said, okay, it looks pretty clean. But we couldn't necessarily see if they were shoving things under the bed or in the closets, right? And then crypto comes along and it's basically a neighborhood of glass houses. And so that same requirement to keep your house clean is actually wildly, hard because every day dirt is found and people can visibly see, well, you have a 20% exposure to sanctions, you have an 80% exposure to darknet markets, you have a 60% exposure to ransomware. And what are you doing to investigate this? And so it's a fascinating thing because, like, when people crap on crypto, I'm like, but you have to understand it's a reflection of how badly we were cleaning houses. Because if a crypto company basically did the same compliance that a bank did, it would be, they can't because they literally can't ignore what they can see. And so I think what's really interesting about the system now, and the reason I say all this is because if you put it together between what Trump's doing in relaxing certain statutes and laws and the way that he's handling crypto and what's kind of happening globally, is I think people are beginning to see until planes fly into a building, nobody cares about money laundering and terrorist financing. And that's a fact I think that the world is about to learn in a really, really sad, hard way because crypto is basically making everything really visible. And I think our response to it is going to be really interesting. And I'm waiting to see what the Financial Action Task Force, I'm waiting to see what FATF does in 2026 when the US has its review, because I think that's going to be the $1 trillion question of do we, humanity, actually care about money laundering and terrorist financing? Or is it all just show?
Well, the interesting part is that now the tech actually allows things that with the self-enclosed, obscured systems and databases from the bank's vote, um, we couldn't do. But with the on-chain world, we can, which I call the on-chain oversight or whatever the name is going to be. And it is also an opportunity for regulators and enforcement agencies to actually leverage the tech to their own favor in a much more transparent, timely manner, and absolutely will require a change of stance and embracing of this new paradigm because most countries tend to have centralized regulators, and we're now dealing with a centralized, decentralized, global 24/7 digital borderless infrastructure, which is very hard to comprehend if you don't invest the time there. In your current experience, what has been the degree in which this stance is changing, and how fast is it changing, both in the sense of a policy making, but also in terms of enforcement agencies and other governmental bodies? What have you seen from your work and relationships changing in a way that not only the market, quote unquote, can benefit, but also the regulators?
So I think one of the interesting things was I was just at an event at Consensus a couple days ago, and one of the speakers said, you know, this technology is still so new. And I was like, it's been what, 13, no, 15 years now, maybe? There are 15-year-olds that are having babies and driving cars in some places. So I don't know if we can still get away with the whole, it's still really new. And I understand why they say that, but I look at when the internet was invented, which I'm actually old enough to remember, and how quickly people realized this technology is going to be game changing and we need to put up at least minimal guardrails, right? We need to do something. And they didn't, I mean, obviously the United States didn't overregulate it. Some people would say Europe did, and that's why like the fangs ended up in America. And a lot of people, I think, could make good arguments that America underregulated it, and that's why social media is rotting the world. And I have a whole chapter on that. So the over under on that remains to be seen. But there was regulation. I think one of the things that was extremely frustrating as an American was early on, there was a terrible guidance issued by the IRS declaring it as property. And then the first, like, really good guidance that really tried to look at the tech was in 2013 when FinCEN put out its money services business guidance. And it basically said, hey, if you're doing this activity that looks like money services business, talks like money services business, walks like money service business, regardless of what you call yourself, you're going to be treated like a money services business, right? And that basically required a bunch of people to register as money services businesses. But then after that, the train kind of went off the rails, and the country that really should have led fell really far behind. And the problem with that is that when you think about financial services as a whole and the relationship between global markets, capital markets, monetary policy, the Biden administration for 4 years basically, I guess, wanted to pretend that this was a fad. And I guess they thought it would go away. And they just refused to take seriously that, okay, however you feel about Dogecoin or Fartcoin or any of this, like, speculative side, there is an aspect of this technology, digital assets, digital finance, that is not going away. That is absolutely the future of digital finance. And I don't know how so many of them ignored it for so long. But now you have other countries that are gaining serious competitive advantages because they were quick to say, we should learn this tech, we should learn about it, we should be innovative in our regulations. Like, I look at, folks like the Monetary Authority of Singapore, or, UAE, where they invented an agency, VARA, the Virtual Asset Regulatory Agency, just to deal with this asset class. And that's kind of the nimbleness and innovation that you needed from the regulatory side that, frankly, the US, the UK, and even Europe to a certain extent, and Tomika had been really behind on. And I just don't know if those countries can catch up, because that was a really long advance that they had. And also, you don't see them catching up. You see them kind of scrambling and doing a lot of hype. But right now in the United States, we still don't have stablecoin legislation. We don't have market structure. We still have, luckily we have folks like the head of the SEC now, Hester Peirce, who is quite brilliant and innovative and is looking at things and is putting out papers, is talking with industry. There's SEC roundtables now. So, like, you're starting to see progress, but it's 2025 and dollar dominance is already kind of waning in the face of a massive digital asset market that was allowed to flourish outside of the US and now gives competition for the dollar in a way that really creates national security issues. And that's a big reason why I wrote the book.
I love that you're principled in the things you do. In that particular sense, I mean, you've been dedicated to the book. Do you want to bring us up to speed on why it happened, how it happened? I love processes, so I would love to understand what your process to write the book was. Give us a little bit of a rundown of how that thing came across, the opportunity to write it, and how you tackled it.
When I left Chainalysis in 2021, was it 2020? Yeah, 2021. I got this weird call from a friend because the January 6th committee was looking for, they thought crypto might have been involved in the funding of Jan 6. They were considering hiring an investigator. And she was like, hey, will you talk to them about the process and what that would look like? And I said, absolutely. And during the course of the call, they very unexpectedly said they needed somebody to lead the financial investigation, a lawyer, and that person would have to quit their job and come work for the House. And I remember Tim Hapey saying, I looked at your LinkedIn profile and I wondered why you wouldn't be perfect for this. And I was like, because I have a 1 year cliff at my company and I can't leave before, like, I think it was, I can't remember what the date. And he said, well, could you start the next day? And I said, well, give me 72 hours to think about it. Um, but I went to work on so actually they gave me 36 hours to think about it. And during those 36 hours, I called one of my mentors and she said, two things that I will never forget. She said, even if you're an independent, this job will pick a party for you because the world will perceive you as either Democrat or Republican based on the fact that you even took this job. And as a non-political person at DOJ, that was actually kind of a legal requirement. We had serious limitations back then on what we could do politically. Um, and as an independent, I was hesitant for that reason. But of the two parties at the time, given where they were headed, you know, that didn't upset me as much. But the second thing she said was, you should also take copious notes because odds are somebody will ask you to write a book someday because it's a pretty amazing experience. Now, nobody asked me to write a book because a lot of people want to forget what happened on January 6th. And I get that. I get the inclination, I get the cognitive dissonance. Um, but it basically started there. And then I took journals of notes, like notebooks of notes, just personal, like things that happened, things I wanted to remember. And then when I left, I remember I hit the road and I was starting the association and I was going to all these fintech conferences and I was talking to all these amazing people. And I was backpacking and staying in hostels and pot and capsule hotels. And I would, get to speak on stage and then I'd get to talk to central bankers and regulators and policymakers. And it was interesting what they were saying on stage versus what they were saying behind the scenes, right? And how on stage they were huge American allies, and backstage it was like, nope, we're getting off the dollar as soon as we possibly can. And that was what some of our allies were saying. So you can imagine what some of our foes were saying. And that's a quote that I took from a former congressional representative, Stephanie Murphy. But basically, I started to see this picture of I was getting this amazing opportunity to see what was really happening in the world, both not only from a how broken American politics actually was, but also what was happening globally in finance that people might be publicly admitting to, but also that they weren't. And what was breaking my heart was watching people, not just in America, but around the world, who might not have any idea because they weren't being informed. And there's this amazing scene at the beginning of the show Newsroom where Jeff Daniels does this thing. And I think it's gone viral recently. So more people know about the show, even though it's from like 2012, I think. But he does this thing where he basically says America is no longer the greatest country on earth. And he rattles off like countless statistics that basically prove that fact. But he says critically, we used to be. We used to do incredible things. We used to build great things. We used to be this amazing country. And the reason we were able to do all of those things was because we were informed. And that scene has stuck with me from the moment that I saw it years ago. And I thought, I think it would make sense to write a book because I don't care what people's politics are, whether you want to be left, whether you want to be right, but I think humans deserve to be informed about what's happening. And unfortunately, thanks to social media, thanks to mainstream media, thanks to the internet, thanks to all kinds of issues, it's just very hard to get good information, objective information. And so I tried my best, right? I'm still a human, so I had my own biases. I tried my best to objectively put out a book that would explain to people this is what's happening. If you feel like you're sitting in a dumpster fire, but you can't quite put your finger on why or who's at fault, here's a 360 view. Instead of 40 books, here's one book that you could read that will explain to you why everything is happening the way that it's happening and likely what's going to happen if we don't consciously make a choice. Is this how we want it to go? And we've been really passively kind of just letting the world turn. And I think if humanity doesn't want a really, really bad turnout in the next 20 or 30 years, we need to wake up and acknowledge like what's happening. And so it was really funny because I said to my old boss, a bunch of us were out to lunch after the committee, and I said to him, I'm thinking about writing a book. And one of the folks said about the committee experience, and I said, well, partially that. And my old boss said, yeah, I think your book would be so much broader because your life touched on so many things and you have this really wide aperture. I would really hope that your book would go way beyond the committee, or at least maybe like the committee and why it was important. And that's what it was. And he kind of really motivated me to think broader. And it is a breadth, not depth book. I mean, I go into depth in the sense that I think the bibliography is 4 pages. I think the endnotes are 30. Like it, if you want to find every site, every source, and the books that you should read, I give it to you. But I just think people don't have that kind of time. And if the average human's attention span is 7 seconds, getting them to sit down and read a 350-page book is already going to be challenging enough. Getting them to sit down and read the 40 books they could read to learn about why the world is burning and how is going to be impossible. But we got to start somewhere.
Absolutely. So, We're recording May 16th. The book went live yesterday.
Well, it was supposed to go live yesterday. Thanks to a glitch at Amazon, it apparently went live 2 days earlier, and they were shipping days before that. So at this point, we're just on the lazy river of fate, and whatever happens, happens, Mauricio. I've given up on trying to control the publishing process.
And I've seen quite a few social posts with people who got the advanced copy and are commenting on the book. I feel that mine is on the mail, but I feel I feel that um, the response, at least from the early arrivals, have been response has been um, very much in line with what I would expect from the caliber of things I've heard you say from everything we've done together in the last few years. But um, what's the feeling of seeing this gaining the world?
The thing that kind of almost made me cry that with like happy tears was a woman that I saw at Consensus, and she had ordered it from Amazon, so she got one of the early release books that she wasn't supposed to get before yesterday. But she said to me, she said, one of the cool things was I showed the book to my dad because we haven't been able to have a discussion about crypto, and we haven't been able to have a discussion about politics because I would just get so frustrated and he would just feel like I was shilling crypto. And your book, I gave him your book and I said, let's read this together and let's talk about it because your book talks about the good and the bad, and it's objective and it's tempered and it's nuanced, and we can have a debate without it feeling like we're both being sold some line of goods. Like we can sit down and have an educated debate. And I almost broke into tears because that was the dream, is what I saw when I was on the January 6th committee that was so terrifying was the direction that America's going in, where people cannot have fact-based, objective, nuanced debates. They can't have them. They're not having them, and the country is literally being ruined because of it. And a friend of mine from law school founded this organization called Millions of Conversations, and the idea, and she did it all the way back after it was after 9/11. She was a Muslim American, and she could see the hate industrial complex like fomenting Islamophobia and just driving people towards hate because there's massive profit in hate, massive otherism and hate, like those aren't accidents, right? And she basically started addressing it, and then she noticed that after Islamophobia, with the rise of white Christian nationalism and all kinds of things that were happening in the United States, the hate industrial complex found other targets beyond Muslims. And that machine just shifted. Same people, same MO, same playbook. And it's killing our country, like literally killing it's like eating us from the inside out. And if for people to be able to have those conversations, I love when people say, I read this book and I felt like I was educated about things that people were purposely keeping from me, or that I felt like I saw things in a new way because you weren't trying to convince me you were right. You were trying to put evidence in front of me so that I could draw my own conclusions from an educated place. And when somebody says that, my heart just soars because again, you read the book and I literally don't care which direction your politics take, but I believe you deserve to make an informed choice. And I talk to too many people who say things that I'm like, well, that's just terrifyingly wrong. And if that's what you're basing your choice on, we're in trouble.
Yeah, I think the angle of nuance to me is also very important, and I'm very aware. Being a social media user junkie, I'm very aware that social media and the speed in which the information flows through social media do not allow a nuanced debate on anything. Maybe that's why we tend to favor LinkedIn, crypto LinkedIn, because it allows for longer form conversation online, and that favors civil disagreements if you don't have to rush through 140 characters or 280 or however long they are now in on Twitter. and it gets you to better places and co-creatively, I want to say. And I love that you're going for that angle with the book. So I will be uh I'll be the judge of that when I get my copy.
Just to pick up on something that's so critical in what you said, I think one of the other reasons why a lot of us like crypto LinkedIn and less crypto Twitter is because of the anonymity versus your beliefs and your opinions and the things that you say being tied to your verified professional profile. Now, are there like, Russian and Chinese bots and people who are not who they say they are on LinkedIn? Absolutely. And I'm not saying they've got it perfect, but they at least are working quite hard. My understanding is to kick those profiles off. So you have a better than likely chance of talking with a real human that has a actual professional profile on LinkedIn. Whereas on Twitter, you could be having a 8 hour long debate with a Russian bot, a Chinese bot, or frankly, just some other bot, or just a hate troller, or I forget all the words that they come up with. But the tone of Twitter or X since Musk took it over has been its own special toxic dumpster fire, partially because I mean, I certainly wasn't going to pay $8 to be verified. I have my name, I have my photo, right? Like that was enough for me. But I think when people have to basically stand up, and this is, I think, something that goes to a larger issue in crypto, which is the difference between anonymity and privacy, which we're talking about a lot more now, which is great because anonymity is not good. Privacy is great. But when you think about what humanity tends to do when it's able to do it anonymously, that's a race to the bottom. Whether it's things that people do with masks, whether it's, what people are able to say online or do online when they don't fear any consequences, I think people start to see how regressive humanity is and how likely it is to race to the bottom the minute that you make things anonymous. And that's the thing about Twitter versus LinkedIn, where I'm like, if you want to be a horrible human on LinkedIn, by all means, do it. And in fact, I've had some trolls that people are like, "Oh my gosh, is that a real human?" I'm like, "Yeah, I've actually met him in real life. That is him. He does that. Like he is that person." Um, but he stands by it. He has a company, he stands by, like, he is a person who's like, "These are my beliefs. I am this person on LinkedIn, and I am this person in real life." And I might disagree with him, I might think he's really disrespectful, he may say horrible things on LinkedIn, on my profile, on my but I do respect him for the fact that he does it publicly under his name, and he comes at me face on. It's not this anonymous crap sitting in your mom's basement with a fake name, a fake profile on Twitter, which is terrifying because that's the kind of stuff that leads to really, really terrifying things. And so I think that's one of the other aspects, but this whole anonymity versus privacy, it just nothing. Well, I'll say rarely does anything good come from anonymity, whereas privacy is something that we should be able to have a conversation about. Earlier you asked what are some of the good trends, like the encouraging trends in crypto I've seen, and that's one of the better ones is the shift of the industry having a conversation about privacy and the kind of anonymity nuts basically being told, "Sit down, you've ruined the industry for long enough."
Well, I'm validated today. Because I'm getting older, like much faster than I would expect. I've been paying a lot of attention to my habits, my routine, my food intake, sleep, workouts, and I've been asking my guests this year what they do to keep themselves healthy in an industry that does not stop for anything. What's your thing?
I swear your timing on this is spooky because I literally just had this kind of like realization moment. I think like a week ago where I'm on the road so much the last 2 years. I literally went digital nomad because I was never home enough to need an apartment. And the two things that I did for 2025, one was I used to do dry January, and now I'm actually trying to do dry 2025. And that's just a personal choice because my Whoop basically told me alcohol is a poison that's killing you. And I just once you see the impact it's having on health, I just was like, you know what? I'm going to try to give that up for a year. And I slip sometimes because good Lord, there are some amazing margaritas out there. But For the most part, I stick to it. And the other thing is I finally acknowledge that I need I need people to ride my ass in order to get things done. Whether it was the marketing company that I hired to help me with the book, or frankly, like a coach, I signed up for like a physical fitness program where it's like one of those weekly check-ins and I have daily tasks and it's walking, it's drinking 80 ounces of water, walking 10,000 steps. They give me the programming for my workout. They give me my fitness pal. I have to log my food. Like it has to cost money. Like it has to hurt because if there's not some ramification, I just wasn't one of those people. When I used to live in DC and I did Krav Maga and Jiu-Jitsu 6 days a week, yes, I could eat whatever I wanted and I was super fit. And people probably remember that gorgeous LinkedIn blonde. And then life traveling happened, right? And so now I'm trying to get back on the wagon. So I really appreciate the question because we don't talk about enough how freaking hard it is. And I'm really grateful to the people in my life who, when I say I really need to eat less or I need to go to this place or I'm not drinking alcohol, I am really grateful that I've never had a person yet say, "Are you sure you don't want to drink? Because I'm drinking." I've always had people say, "That's awesome. Good for you." And I don't know if they realize how big a deal that is and how much support that is, but I've had friends who haven't had that. And I'm really grateful for the people in my life who, when I'm trying to make myself healthy, they don't take it as a personal affront. They don't, get bothered by the life choices they're making. They just say, "That's great. Like, cool." And that's just amazing support.
Yeah, I love that community. It takes a village, I guess. That's the
It really
yeah.
does.
And for the folks that reach out to you to ask how they can join the industry, what they need to study, read, and all that. Um, Other than your book, what are the things that you have recommended recently for people to understand what this is and how to get engaged?
Obviously, I'm super biased. And if you're a woman or ally who's into gender advocacy, the womeninCrypto.org, like we are big into education. We frequently have events that are education about crypto. So that's obviously my own personal bias. I would say a close second is actually Owl Explains. Like, if you're new and you really want to learn about like just base like crypto basics, they're actually having a conference next week in London, which I'm really excited to attend. And I think they do a really good job with kind of like objective, not shilling education, and it's like a super easy entry point. So I'm a big fan of that. And then honestly, like I know I have friends who say, oh, they follow a handful of people on crypto Twitter. And I think that's great for a certain segment of the industry. I'm not the best person to ask for that, but I think there are really good posts out there that actually say who to follow on crypto Twitter. But my go-tos on crypto LinkedIn are obviously you, Ari Redboard, Nilmini Rubin at Hedera, Carol House, Dante Disparte at Circle, and try to like get them from around the world. Like somebody I met who's absolutely incredible, and I forget I'm going to butcher the name of his organization, but his name is Hoklai Chia, and it's HOKLIACHIA, and he does incredible work in APAC. And I think one of the things that I was really blessed when I got out of the US was to meet all the people who are doing just incredible projects around the world. And one of the things about crypto that's really weird, and I hope it's a trend that changes, is that this technology is so global. It's so able to connect people globally through finance, and yet ironically, the networks, the connections are so siloed. And I hope that that really changes because I had this amazing opportunity, and it's partially why I built the association so globally. Most of our members are actually outside of the United States, and we have events in usually at least 12 countries a year. And you really need to see what's happening globally to understand what's happening so fast in so many different sectors. And I hope that people get a chance, especially post COVID, the ability to Zoom. We have a virtual chapter that meets, but like there's so many opportunities. If you're sitting in a country and you don't know what's happening outside of that country, you're at a massive disadvantage. And I hope people will take the opportunity to find educators outside of your country, outside of your region, on the other side of the world, right? Luke Raven is an AML influencer in Australia. I love following that guy, right? David Birch in the UK, adore him. Like there's just some people that there's really great accounts, but if your LinkedIn is predominantly one country, you can't even imagine how much you're missing out on.
Oh, our friend Steve Hollis. You being Steve.
Oh yes, I cannot believe it. Yes, 100%. Steve Vallis and Rochelle Cox from Blockchain APAC. Summer Sen at Talos in Singapore is an especially huge favorite of mine. Mark Montfort and Arturo, God, I always butcher Arturo's last name, Ramirez, I think. But they run the DeFi Association out of Australia. Lisa Wade out of Australia. I mean, when I tell you that and I didn't even touch LATAM, right? Like there's incredible people doing amazing things, and it's just, I mean, it's just interesting to me the number of people I know who will go out of their way on their Spotify to try to listen to global music and not just listen to music from their country. But when I ask them, who are the influencers in your industry that you follow outside of your country? And there aren't many. And part of that is the social media algorithms. The social media algorithms do not encourage breadth, depth, exploration, or a widening of your perspectives. They would like you to be as tunnel viewed as possible. They would they would love it if you sat in the closet and just listened to like one sound bite over and over and over, right? And you have to fight against the filter bubble that the algorithms put you in. And I talk about that in the book, where it's like it's work to get educated outside of the filter bubble that you as a human, but also that as social media would otherwise paint you into. And if you are interested, it's just like fitness. If you're willing to do the work, you can get amazing results, but it does require you to do some work and swim upstream, because otherwise, human nature and social media will happily put you into a tiny little sardine can lacking mobility and you will struggle.
Next one. I don't want to assume, but I will ask. If we had to fix one thing in the industry right now to avoid wasting another 20 years and not getting anywhere, what's that one thing and why?
Oh, that is such a good and hard question, and it really deserves serious thought. And I wish I had 10 minutes to think about it. But if I had to say off the fly, the thing in the industry that really bothers me, or I wish we could change, is there's been a horrible habit in the industry for the, I'll say, least ethical or least responsible voices to be the loudest. And for the pumps, for the crypto Twitters, for people who didn't necessarily respect the rule of law or AML-CFT, or the, like, just, I'll just put it this way: the irresponsible innovators versus the responsible innovators. And unfortunately, there are some amazing CEOs and leaders in crypto who are quieter, and they're frequently drowned out by some of the loudest voices in crypto, oftentimes some of the ones who make the most money or who have the most market share. And the way that they do that is usually by doing illegal or unethical things, right? And unfortunately, when those characters drive this industry, that is a recipe for disaster. And I think that's my fear. And part of, if you go to the catalystmovement.org, part of what I want to do with this book is gather people together around the world to change and turn education into action. Because I do believe that a concerned group of dedicated citizens who are willing to try can actually have a huge impact on the world. And whether you call it blockchain for good, or whether you call it being a catalyst for good, whatever it is, I think enough of us can find each other where we can start to turn that tide. But I remember when Julian Sawyer at Zodia he came out, because Copper had done something at a conference that was really not cool. And he came out publicly and said, we need to be more responsible as an industry. Like this kind of stuff, it was after FTX, and it was like, we need to be better. And I'm paraphrasing, but it was basically, we need to be better, do better, and just set higher standards for ourselves. And I wish I could clone Julian and make like 100 of him, but we need more of that and less of the make money at all costs, have toxic work environments, not care about people, and just drive humanity into the ground. And until that changes, I really worry that crypto will get kind of snapped up into the same toxic milieu as unfettered capitalism has done in the United States, and that would be tragic.
I'm glad that we have the likes of you and all the names you just mentioned to fend that off and take it to a more responsible, sustainable, balanced path, even if permissionlessness yields the best and the worst from humans. We're here to do better for sure. How can people learn more about you, the stuff you do, Wick, the book, whatever else, and get in touch with you, Amanda?
Yeah, the best way is probably amandawick.com. I'm also on LinkedIn, and I do try to stay on top of my messages. There's just a lot of spam in there. So if I don't respond to you quickly, just give me a minute. But definitely go to amandawick.com. There's an ability to sign up. There's an action page that talks more about kind of what we're doing and what I'm hoping to, turn the book into. And then I would just say connect with me on LinkedIn. If you're a Twitter or Instagram person, I am on there. I'm not gonna lie to you. I'm not as prolific and I check those messages far more rarely. But I think I'm Amanda underscore S underscore Wick on those two. But best way is definitely LinkedIn and amandawick.com. And do sign up for the newsletter amandawick.com because I don't pepper your inboxes a lot and I'm trying to only send the things that are worth interrupting you for.
Awesome. Amanda, this was delicious. Thank you so much.
We finally made it happen.
I'm so glad we made it happen. And I will hopefully bump you into your next visit to London or in a random crypto conference somewhere. Thank you so much.
100%. Talk to you soon. Thank you.
Catch us online. We're on Instagram at BlockDropsPodcast, on Twitter at BlockDropsPod or ZeroX Mauricio. We're on Lens at blockdrops.lens. We have a newsletter on LinkedIn. Write to us at blockdropspodcast@gmail.com, and you can listen to the BlockDrops podcast at Spotify, iColab, Faberbun Tech, and all of the other major streaming platforms. Yay! Thank you so much, Amanda, for finding time in the busy schedule of touring the book. I love this chat. Don't forget to leave the ratings on your favorite player and check the merch store at blockdropspodcast.xyz. This is all for today. Stay rare, stay weird. LFG.